I stared at Joan with clenched fists, my mind racing with 100 thoughts, none of them making sense. How did it come to this? How did we end up here, standing in the middle of our living room, with her tears falling silently onto the carpet, and my heart pounding so fiercely that I could feel it in my throat? I used to think I had a good marriage. Joan and I met 10 years ago at a friend's barbecue. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room with her smile, bright, warm, infectious. Back then, I was a few years out of college, working in sales at a local tech company, and still figuring out what I wanted from life. Joan was different. She knew exactly what she wanted. She had a steady job at a pharmaceutical firm, a vision for her future, and an energy that drew people in. She drew me in. We married 2 years later. It wasn't some fairy tale romance. There were ups and downs, but that was normal, right? We loved each other. At least, I thought we did. We settled into a comfortable life. I got promoted, moved up the ranks, and eventually became a regional manager. Joan moved up too. Her role shifted to marketing director, and she traveled a lot more than she used to. But that was fine. I was proud of her, proud of us. We were building a future together. Lately, though, things had changed. Subtle at first, late nights at the office, business trips that seemed longer than they needed to be. I noticed she started dressing differently too, more stylish, more daring. I didn't think much of it at first. She's just trying to fit in with the younger crowd at work, I told myself. I had no reason to doubt her. Joan was loyal. She was my wife. But then, there were the phone calls. Late at night, hushed tones, and hurried goodbyes. I would ask who it was, and she'd laugh it off. Just work stuff, she would say. You know how they are, always needing something last minute. And I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But the doubt started creeping in. Little things I noticed. A missed call from an unknown number. Messages she seemed to delete almost instantly. I tried to push it out of my mind. I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid. After all, we'd been married for nearly 8 years. We had a good life, nice house, decent jobs, a future that looked bright enough. I had no reason to think she would betray me. Until that day. That day, when it all started to unravel, when I came home from work early, and everything changed. I remember the day with a strange clarity. It was a Tuesday, one of those ordinary, forgettable days. I left the office early because a client meeting had been canceled last minute. I thought I'd surprise Joan. Maybe we could have an early dinner, talk, reconnect. Things had been tense between us for weeks, and I figured it was time to break the ice, to remind ourselves why we got together in the first place. As I drove home, I felt a slight twinge of guilt for suspecting her. Joan had been under a lot of stress lately with her new responsibilities, and I hadn't exactly been the most attentive husband. Work had consumed me too, but I wanted to make it up to her. I thought maybe a night together, just the two of us, would help ease the tension that had crept into our conversations. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Joan's car was parked outside, so I knew she was home. I walked up to the door, ready to call out her name, but something stopped me. An uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the scent. It wasn't her usual perfume. This was different, musky, almost masculine. I paused, trying to shake off the weird feeling creeping over me. I shrugged it off and moved further into the house. I called out to her, but there was no answer. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, buzzing with a message from a number I didn't recognize. I didn't read it at first, but my eyes caught a glimpse of the preview. Can't wait to see you again. My heart skipped a beat. I told myself it was nothing, a friend maybe, or a work colleague. I felt ridiculous, like some jealous schoolboy sneaking around. But the doubt was there, gnawing at me. I went upstairs, calling her name again. The bedroom door was ajar, and I heard a rustle, a soft thud, like something, or someone, moving quickly. I stepped closer, my heartbeat quickening, and saw Joan sitting on the edge of the bed. Her face flushed, her hair disheveled. She was startled, almost guilty-looking, as if caught doing something she shouldn't. "Frank," she said, too quickly. "You're home early." Her voice was strained, a little too high-pitched. I glanced around the room, my eyes darting over every detail. Everything looked normal, but there was a tension in the air. Something was off. "Yeah," I replied slowly, watching her face. "Thought we could spend some time together." I forced a smile, trying to read her expression, but she was hard to read, too calm, too controlled. I noticed her hand twitching slightly, the way it always did when she was nervous. She stood up abruptly. "That's great," she said, but her eyes flicked past me for just a second, a quick, almost imperceptible glance towards the bathroom door. I turned instinctively, but there was nothing there, just a closed door. I heard a faint sound from inside, like the shuffle of footsteps. My mind was racing, piecing together fragments of suspicion, but I couldn't bring myself to ask her directly. Not yet. Instead, I asked, "Everything okay?" My voice sounded strange to me, almost distant. Joan hesitated for a moment, then smiled, that same smile that had always melted my worries away. "Of course," she said, reaching out to touch my arm. Her fingers felt cold against my skin. I wasn't expecting you so soon. You surprised me, that's all." I nodded slowly, trying to shake off the unease, but something in her eyes told me that this was just the beginning. The cracks in our life, in our marriage, were starting to show, and I had a feeling that whatever was behind that door would change everything. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The signs were there, screaming at me, pulling me toward the truth that I wasn't ready to face. I turned back toward the bathroom door, and Joan stepped into my line of sight, almost as if to block me. Her movements were too quick, too deliberate. "Is something wrong?" I asked, my voice hardening, the calm I had forced starting to slip. She shook her head too quickly. "No, nothing's wrong. I was getting ready to shower," she stammered, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her blouse. But I noticed the way her eyes flicked again toward the door, the nervous flutter of her fingers. She was hiding something, or someone. "Who's in there, Joan?" I asked, my voice low, tight. "What?" She laughed, a shaky, hollow sound. "No one's in there, Frank. Why would you even—" But I'd heard it then, clear as day, a faint cough, followed by a hurried whisper. My heart dropped into my stomach. I stepped around her, moving toward the door. Joan grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Frank, don't!" she pleaded, her voice breaking. I froze, looking at her. Her eyes were wide, panicked, her face pale. My heart hammered in my chest, and I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck. "Joan," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "tell me the truth. Who is in there?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she let go of my arm. She took a step back, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Frank, please." I didn't wait for her to finish. I pushed the door open with a force that sent it banging against the wall. And there he was, a man, standing there half-dressed, his shirt unbuttoned, his shoes in his hands. He looked at me with wide eyes, frozen like a deer caught in headlights. My vision blurred with rage. I didn't know him, had never seen him before, but that didn't matter. I knew exactly who he was. "Who the hell are you?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the bathroom tiles. The man opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked terrified. Good, I thought. He should be terrified. I took a step forward, fists clenched, ready to smash his face in, but Joan grabbed me again, pulling me back. "Frank, stop! Please don't!" she cried, tears streaming down her face. "This isn't what you think." I turned to her, my face contorted with fury. "Not what I think. You're standing here half naked with another man in our house, and you tell me it's not what I think." She burst into tears, covering her face with her hands, as if that would make it all disappear. The man looked like he was about to bolt, but I blocked the doorway. You're not going anywhere, I growled, my anger boiling over. Not until I get some answers. Joan sobbed harder, her whole body trembling. Frank, I'm so sorry. I wanted to try something different. My head snapped back to her. Are you serious? I shouted, seething with rage. What's your excuse? And then it happened. She dropped to her knees, a broken, sobbing mess. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I felt trapped. I needed to feel something, anything, again. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation and guilt. I'm so sorry, Frank. I'm so sorry. The room spun around me and I felt like the floor was giving way beneath my feet. This was the moment that everything I thought I knew about my life came crashing down. Joan, my wife, my partner, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And now, there was no going back. I stood there, frozen, my mind grappling with the weight of what was happening. Joan's words echoed in my head, mixing with the rushing sound of blood in my ears. I wanted to try something different. I kept replaying her confession, the cold, raw truth of it, cutting deeper than I thought anything ever could. The man, her lover, still stood by the sink, his face as pale as death. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the tiles. I turned back to him, rage surging through my veins. Who the hell are you? I demanded again, my voice a low growl. How long has this been going on? He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He didn't look like much, younger than me, maybe by a few years, with a slim build and neatly trimmed beard. His eyes darted from me to Joan and back again, searching for an escape. Answer me! I shouted, stepping closer, the muscles in my arms tensing. I could feel the anger coursing through every inch of my body, a tidal wave ready to crash. I'm sorry, man, he finally stammered, his voice shaking. I didn't know she was married. That was it. A spark ignited, and I lunged forward, grabbing him by the collar. You didn't know, I roared, shaking him violently. You're in my house with my wife, and you didn't know. Joan jumped up, pulling at my arm. Frank, please, stop it. This isn't helping. Just let him go, please. I turned to her, my face inches from hers, eyes wild with fury. Let him go? Are you serious, Joan? You bring him into our home, into our bed, and you want me to just let him go? She flinched at my words, her face crumpling in pain. Frank, I'm sorry. I know I hurt you, but please, this won't fix anything. I shoved him back against the wall, my hand still gripping his shirt. Get out, I hissed through clenched teeth. Get the hell out of my house before I do something we'll both regret. The man didn't hesitate. He scrambled past me, nearly tripping over his own feet as he rushed out of the bathroom. I heard him fumbling down the stairs, and then the front door slamming shut behind him. He was gone, but the mess he left behind, that stayed. Joan stood there, wiping her tears, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. She tried to reach out to me, but I stepped back. Don't touch me, I spat, my voice cold and distant. Don't you dare touch me. Her face crumpled again, but she nodded, her shoulders shaking. Frank, please, just let me explain. Explain what, Joan? I snapped, my voice rising again. Explain how you ended up in bed with some stranger while I was out working my ass off for us? Explain how you could do this to me? She covered her face with her hands, her sobs coming in deep, heaving breaths. I don't know, she whispered through her fingers. I don't know. I just felt so empty, so lost. I needed to feel alive again. Alive? I laughed bitterly. You needed to feel alive, so you went out and fucked another man. That's your excuse? She flinched again, her tears streaming down her cheeks. It wasn't just about the Essex, she whispered. It was, I don't know. the excitement, the danger. I felt like I was suffocating, like I was drowning in this life, in this marriage. Her words cut deep, deeper than I thought possible. I stared at her, my jaw clenched, my fists tight. "And you thought this was the solution?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You thought betraying me was the way out?" Joan fell silent, her sobs subsiding into soft whimpers. She didn't have an answer, or maybe she didn't want to say it. I didn't care. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. The silence between us was thick and heavy, like the air before a storm. I stood there, feeling the sharp edges of betrayal pressing in on me from all sides. Joan's eyes were red and swollen from crying, her shoulders slumped as if the weight of her guilt was finally too much to bear. I could see her lips moving, but no words were coming out. I didn't know what to do, what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her until my voice gave out. Another part wanted to grab my keys, walk out, and never look back. But I was rooted in place, trapped by my own confusion and anger. Joan finally spoke, her voice hoarse and barely audible. "Frank, I know you don't want to hear this right now, but I need you to understand. I never meant for it to happen this way. I never meant to hurt you." I let out a hollow laugh. "You never meant to hurt me? Joan, you invited him into our bed, into our life. How could you possibly say you didn't mean to hurt me?" She took a deep breath, wiping her eyes. "I was confused, okay? I felt like I was losing myself, like I was just your wife, just a part of this machine. I needed to feel something different, something new. I never thought it would go this far." I shook my head, trying to process her words. "So this was about feeling alive? About escaping some imaginary prison you think our marriage became? And you thought cheating was the answer?" She looked down, shame and regret etched on her face. "I don't know, Frank, I felt like I was disappearing, like I wasn't even myself anymore. And then I met him." Her voice trailed off, and I felt another surge of anger. "Met him where, Joan? How did this start?" I asked, my tone sharp, demanding. "At a conference," she confessed, barely able to look me in the eye. "A few months ago, in Chicago. He was in marketing too, from another company. We got to talking and it was easy. I didn't plan for it to happen, but one drink led to another and then we ended up in his room." I winced at the mental image, my stomach twisting with nausea. "And that was it?" "One time?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She shook her head slowly, biting her lip. "No, it wasn't just one time, it continued. We would meet whenever I traveled. Sometimes he'd come to town." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Months?" I echoed, disbelief lacing my voice. "You've been lying to me for months, Joan? How could you do that? How could you come home and look me in the eye every day, knowing you were sneaking around behind my back?" She flinched, guilt pouring out of her like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. "I didn't know how to stop Frank," she cried, her voice breaking. "Every time I thought about ending it, something would pull me back. I felt, I don't know, alive, in a way I hadn't felt in years. I know that doesn't make it right. I know that. But—" I turned away from her, disgusted by her words, by everything she was saying. "But what, Joan? You were bored? Tired of our life? So you thought screwing some stranger would fix things?" She fell silent again, defeated, broken. I could see the regret in her eyes, but it wasn't enough. Nothing she said could ever be enough. I walked over to the dresser, grabbed my wallet and keys. I needed to get out of there, away from her, away from this nightmare. Joan reached out, panic in her voice. "Frank, please! Don't leave, please! We can talk about this. We can fix it. I know I've made a mistake, but we can work through it, can't we?" I turned to her, my eyes cold. "Fix it? Work through it?" I shook my head, my mouth twisting into a bitter smile. There's nothing left to fix, Joan. You destroyed it the moment you brought him into our home, into our lives. I don't know who you are anymore, but you're not the woman I married. She crumbled, sobbing harder now, but I didn't care. I couldn't. I turned and walked out, leaving her behind, her cries echoing down the hallway as I stepped out into the cool night air. I didn't know where I was going, or what I was going to do next. I just knew I needed to get away, to breathe, to figure out what the hell came next. The cold air hit my face as I stepped outside, sharp and biting, cutting through the fog in my mind. I stood on the porch for a moment, my breath coming in ragged gasps, trying to steady myself. My hands were shaking, and I could feel the adrenaline still pumping through my veins, making everything around me feel surreal, almost like I was watching my life unfold from outside my own body. I had no idea where to go. I didn't have a plan. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there, not with Joan, not in that house that now felt like a stranger's home. I got into my car and started the engine, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I drove without thinking, the streetlights blurring past me as I sped through the quiet, empty streets. After a while, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a small, dingy bar on the edge of town. I'd been here once or twice before with some buddies from work, but tonight, it felt like a place I could disappear for a while. A place where no one knew me, where I could drown out the chaos in my mind with cheap whiskey and cigarette smoke. I pushed open the door and walked inside. The smell of stale beer and sweat hit me immediately, mingling with the low hum of murmured conversations and clinking glasses. A few heads turned as I walked in, but no one seemed to care much about the disheveled man who had just stumbled in from the cold. I found a stool at the far end of the bar, away from the few regulars scattered around. The bartender, a woman with tired eyes and a rough edge to her smile, came over. "What'll it be?" she asked, her voice flat, bored. "Whiskey," I said, my voice sounding hollow, even to me. "Keep it coming." She nodded, grabbed a bottle from the shelf, and poured a generous glass. I took it in one gulp, feeling the burn slide down my throat and settle into my stomach. It was a welcome distraction from the storm raging in my head. For a while, I just sat there staring at the glass, my thoughts spiraling. How did it come to this? How did I become this man sitting alone in a bar, drowning his sorrows because his wife decided she needed something different? I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat, but it caught in my chest, turning into a strangled sigh. I ordered another drink, then another. The alcohol dulled the edges of my anger, turning it into a heavy, aching numbness. I tried to make sense of Joan's words, of her excuses. I wanted to hate her, to despise her for what she'd done, but every time I tried, all I felt was a crushing sadness, a deep, hollow emptiness where love had once been. I pulled out my phone, staring at it for a long moment, my thumb hovering over her number. I didn't know why, but I wanted to call her, to hear her voice, to demand answers she probably didn't have. Instead, I tossed the phone onto the bar, feeling disgusted with myself. What was the point? No amount of talking was going to change what she'd done. Nothing could erase the image of her standing there, her eyes filled with guilt, her mouth forming words I didn't want to hear. I was on my fourth drink when someone sat down beside me. I glanced over, my vision slightly blurred from the booze, and saw a man about my age, with dark hair and a sympathetic smile. "Tough night?" he asked, nodding toward my empty glass. I gave a short, humorless laugh. "You could say that." He motioned to the bartender. "Another for him on me," he said, and she poured another shot. I looked at him, trying to figure out what he wanted. "Why?" I asked, my voice thick with alcohol and anger. He shrugged. "You look like you could use it. And I've been there, man. I know the look." I felt a flicker of curiosity. "Yeah? And what look is that?" "The look of a man who just had his life turned upside down," he replied, his tone sincere. I nodded, staring into the amber liquid in front of me. You have no idea. He smiled a little sadly. Maybe more than you think. Divorced 2 years ago. Walked in on my wife with another guy. Hell of a thing to see. I felt my jaw clench. Yeah, I muttered. Hell of a thing. He raised his glass. To the things that make us stronger, he said, a wry smile on his lips. Or at least, the things that make us drink. I couldn't help but chuckle, a bitter laugh escaping me. I'll drink to that, I replied, clinking my glass against his. We sat there in silence for a while, two strangers united by the same bitter experience, the same shared sense of betrayal. I didn't know his name, didn't need to. All I knew was that in this moment, he understood. And for now, that was enough. We sat there for a while, exchanging stories between drinks. His name was Alex. He had an easy way about him, a calm that I found strangely comforting. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was the fact that he didn't know me, didn't know Joan, didn't know our mess of a life. He only knew the pain of betrayal, the sting of finding out that everything you believed in was a lie. He knew that, and that was enough. I don't know how long we sat there, but eventually, the conversation shifted back to Joan. I felt the familiar ache in my chest tighten as I thought about her again, about what she had done, about what she had said. I wanted to try something different. The words kept repeating in my head, over and over, like a broken record. I hated it. I hated her. But at the same time, I wanted to understand. I needed to understand. What about you, man? Alex asked, pulling me out of my thoughts. What's your story? I took a deep breath, my fingers tracing the rim of my glass. My wife, I started, my voice thick with emotion. I caught her today, with another man, in our house, in our bed. Alex nodded slowly, not saying anything, just letting me speak. It was the first time I had said it out loud, and the words tasted bitter on my tongue. I knew something was off, I continued. I saw the signs, but I ignored them. I didn't want to believe it. I thought she loved me. I thought we had something real. He nodded again, his eyes soft with understanding. I get that, he said quietly. You start questioning everything, wondering where it all went wrong, wondering if there was something you could have done differently. Exactly, I muttered, feeling a wave of frustration and sorrow wash over me. She said she felt trapped, like she needed something different, something to feel alive again. And I can't get it out of my head that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't what she needed anymore. Alex leaned back, his eyes narrowing slightly. Or maybe, he said carefully, she's just using that as an excuse. I mean, it's easy to blame the marriage, to blame the routine, but at the end of the day, she made a choice, right? I nodded slowly, his words sinking in. He was right. She had made a choice to lie, to cheat, to betray everything we had built together. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. You know, after my wife left, I spent months blaming myself. I kept thinking, maybe if I'd worked less, been more attentive, more this or more that. But in the end, I realized something. She did what she did because she wanted to. Not because of me, not because of our marriage. She wanted to cheat. That's on her. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been so focused on trying to figure out where I had gone wrong, what I had done to push Joan away, that I hadn't considered the possibility that it wasn't about me at all. Maybe it was just about her needs, her desires, her selfishness. I looked at Alex, my mind churning with new thoughts, new questions. But how do you move on? I asked, my voice raw. How do you stop thinking about it, stop feeling like this? He shrugged. a sad smile tugging at his lips. You don't. Not right away. It takes time. A lot of time. And you have to let yourself feel it. All of it. The anger, the hurt, the confusion. You can't bury it, or it'll eat you alive. Trust me, I tried. It didn't work. I nodded, his words resonating with me. I had been trying to push it all down, to drown it in alcohol, in distraction, but I knew he was right. I needed to face it, to confront it head on, even if it felt like it would tear me apart. And eventually, Alex continued, you find a way to breathe again. You find a way to live, to rebuild. You meet new people, make new memories, and little by little, the pain fades. It never goes away completely, but it becomes a part of who you are. A scar, but one that doesn't hurt as much anymore. I stared at my glass, his words swirling in my mind. I didn't know if I was ready to start healing, if I even knew how. But I did know one thing. I couldn't stay in this place forever, stuck in this moment, replaying the betrayal over and over in my head. I had to find a way out, a way forward. Thanks, man, I said quietly, meeting his eyes. I needed to hear that. He smiled, a genuine, understanding smile. Anytime. We're all just trying to survive out here, right? I nodded, feeling a small flicker of something in my chest. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of acceptance. I wasn't sure yet. But it was something, and for now that was enough. I left the bar feeling heavier but clearer, my mind no longer spinning wildly out of control. The conversation with Alex had given me a strange sense of calm, a momentary reprieve from the storm inside. The cold air outside was sobering, snapping me back to reality. I needed to go home. I needed to face Joan again. The drive back was slow, the streets almost empty in the late hours. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I tried to rehearse what I would say to her, how I would confront her again, this time without the shouting, without the rage that had clouded my mind earlier. I needed answers, real answers, and I needed to understand why. Maybe it wouldn't change anything, maybe it wouldn't make the pain go away, but I had to know. When I pulled up to the house, all the lights were off. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the darkened windows, feeling the familiar churn of dread in my gut. The house felt different now, foreign. I used to see it as a safe place, a sanctuary where Joan and I built our life together. Now it felt like a place of secrets, of betrayal. I didn't even want to go inside, but I knew I had to. I opened the door quietly, stepping into the dark, silent hallway. The smell of her perfume still lingered, a painful reminder of what had happened just hours earlier. I walked through the living room, glancing around as if expecting to see some trace of him, her lover, still lurking in the shadows, but the house was empty. Joan was sitting on the couch, curled up with a blanket around her shoulders, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up as I entered, and I saw a flash of relief, maybe even hope, in her eyes. "Frank," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You came back?" I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, my hands in my pockets, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. She waited, her eyes wide, searching my face for some sign, some clue of what I was thinking. "I needed to," I finally said, my voice calm but strained. "We need to talk, for real this time." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. I'm so sorry, Frank. I've been sitting here thinking, trying to figure out what to say, how to make you understand." I held up a hand, stopping her. "I don't want excuses, Joan. I don't want apologies. I want the truth. Why did you do it? Why him? Why like this?" She swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly. I don't know if I have a simple answer," she began, her voice wavering. "I was feeling lost, trapped, but it's more than that. I felt like we were drifting apart, like you didn't see me anymore." I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. "What do you mean I didn't see you?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. We were fine, Joan. We had a life. We had plans. How could you say that? She sighed, her shoulders slumping. We were fine, sure, but I wasn't, Frank. I felt like I was fading, like I was just existing. I know it sounds selfish, but I needed something to shake me up, to remind me that I'm still here, that I'm still me. I shook my head, frustration bubbling up again. And you thought sleeping with someone else would fix that? That it would somehow make everything better? She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't plan it, Frank. I didn't wake up one day and decide to cheat on you. It just happened. And once it started, I couldn't stop. I wanted to, I swear, but every time I tried, I felt like I was losing something, like I was giving up this part of myself that I'd found again. I felt the sting of her words, the raw honesty in them. It didn't make it hurt any less, but at least it was something. At least she wasn't hiding behind excuses anymore. So what now, Joan? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Where do we go from here? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. I don't know, Frank, she admitted. I want to fix this. I want to try. But I know I've hurt you. And maybe I've destroyed everything. I don't know how to make it right. I don't even know if I can. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I don't know either, I replied honestly. But I can't just pretend like nothing happened. I can't just forgive and forget. She nodded, her face crumpling again. I understand. I don't expect you to. I'm sorry, Frank. I really am. We sat there in the dark, the silence stretching between us like a chasm, both of us lost in our own thoughts, our own regrets. I knew then that nothing would ever be the same, that we were standing at the edge of something we might never come back from. But for now, all I could do was sit with the pain, with the uncertainty, and try to figure out what came next. The hours dragged on, and the silence between us grew thicker, more oppressive. Joan sat on the edge of the couch, her body tense, her eyes flickering with a mix of hope and fear. I could tell she was waiting for me to say something, anything. But I didn't have the words. I felt drained, hollowed out by everything that had happened. Finally, she spoke again, her voice soft, almost tentative. Frank, what are you thinking? I need to know. I need to know where we stand. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to find the right words, trying to understand my own thoughts. I don't know, Joan, I replied, my voice flat. I feel like I don't even know who you are anymore. You say you didn't mean to hurt me, but how could you not know that this would destroy us? She flinched, her hands gripping the edge of the blanket tighter. I didn't think. I was selfish. I know. I got lost in my own needs, my own confusion. But I swear, Frank, I never stopped loving you. I didn't know how to fix what was broken inside me. I felt a bitter laugh escape me, sharp and jagged. You didn't know how to fix yourself, so you decided to break us instead? That's what you're saying? She shook her head quickly, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, that's not what I meant. I was wrong, Frank. I know I was. I made a terrible mistake. I betrayed you, and I hate myself for it. But I don't want to lose you. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right, to earn your trust back, if you'll let me. I looked away, my mind spinning. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her that it was too late, that there was nothing she could do to make this right. But another part of me, a smaller, quieter part, remembered the good times, the love we had shared, the life we had built together. Was it all worth throwing away because of one terrible mistake? Could we somehow rebuild from this, even though I had no idea where to start? I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I don't know if I can forgive you, Joan, I said slowly, carefully. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. But I also don't know if I'm ready to walk away. Not yet. Not without trying. Her eyes widened, a flicker of hope igniting within them. You mean you're willing to try? She whispered, almost afraid to believe it. I nodded, feeling a heaviness in my chest. Yeah, but it won't be easy, it won't be quick, and you're going to have to be honest with me about everything. No more lies, no more secrets. Can you do that? She nodded eagerly, her tears flowing freely now. Yes, Frank. I swear. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll go to therapy. I'll answer every question you have. I'll do anything. I held up a hand to stop her. This isn't just about you doing what it takes. It's about me, too, trying to find a way to move past this. And I don't know if I can, but I'm willing to try. For now. She let out a shuddering breath, her shoulders shaking. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Thank you for giving me a chance. I nodded again, still feeling uncertain, still feeling lost. I don't know what comes next, Joan. I don't have a plan. But I know one thing. If we're going to do this, we have to do it together. No more hiding. No more pretending. She reached out, tentatively, as if afraid I would pull away. Can I hold your hand? She asked softly. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly extended my hand. Her fingers closed around mine, and for a brief second, I felt the warmth of her touch, the familiarity that once brought me comfort. It felt strange now, foreign, but it was a start. We sat there, holding hands, both of us afraid to speak, afraid to shatter the fragile peace we had just created. I didn't know if we could make it through this, if we could ever find our way back to what we once had. But for the first time, since this nightmare began, I felt a tiny glimmer of hope. A small, tentative spark that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal. The days dragged on, a blur of awkward conversations, tense silences, and endless questions. Joan and I tried to piece things back together, but it was like trying to rebuild a shattered vase with only our bare hands. Every attempt seemed to cut deeper, and the cracks only grew wider. We went to therapy, desperate to find a way through the fog. Our therapist, a woman with kind eyes, guided us through the wreckage, making us confront the pain head-on. Joan was honest, painfully so. She told me everything, the details of her affair, the nights with him, the lies she had woven to keep it going. I hated hearing it, but I needed to know. I needed to understand what had led us to this point. But no matter how much she talked, no matter how many times she said she was sorry, I couldn't shake the anger that boiled inside me. Every time I looked at her, I still saw him. I still saw that moment when my world had crumbled into dust. I was drowning in the bitterness, unable to breathe, unable to forgive. And then, just as I thought I was starting to see a way forward, the phone rang. It was a Thursday evening, the light outside fading, and Joan was in the kitchen, staring blankly at a cup of tea she hadn't touched. My phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the number, unknown. For a second, I considered ignoring it, but something made me pick it up. Hello? I answered, my voice flat. There was a pause on the other end, then a man's voice, hesitant, filled with dread. Is this Frank? Yes, I replied, my brow furrowing. Who is this? The voice trembled slightly. I'm Robert, Joan's boss at the firm. I felt a cold sensation crawl up my spine. Robert, why are you calling me? He hesitated, and I could hear the tension in his breath. I didn't want to be the one to tell you, but Joan, she's been in an accident. A car accident. She's at St. Mary's Hospital. The room spun around me, my heart pounding in my chest. An accident? I managed to say, my voice cracking. Is she okay? I don't know much, he answered quickly. I just got the call from her assistant. They said it was serious. You need to get there. I didn't wait to hear more. I dropped the phone and rushed out the door, my mind racing, panic gripping me. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity, my thoughts spiraling out of control. I replayed every conversation, every moment of the last few weeks, wondering if this was some kind of cosmic punishment, a final twist of the knife. When I reached the hospital, I ran through the corridors, my chest heaving, my hands trembling. I finally found her in the emergency room, lying on a stretcher, her face pale and bruised, a thick bandage wrapped around her head. Machines beeped steadily beside her, tubes and wires snaking around her fragile body. A nurse stopped me at the door, her expression serious. "Are you her husband?" "Yes," I choked out, my eyes fixed on Joan's still form. "What happened? Is she going to be okay?" The nurse glanced at her chart, then back at me, her face grim. "She was in a head-on collision. They've stabilized her for now, but she's in a coma. We're monitoring her closely, but it's too early to tell if she'll recover or not." My legs gave way, and I sank into a chair, the air knocked out of me like a punch to the gut. A coma. My mind couldn't process the words. This was Joan, the woman who had betrayed me, the woman I was trying to forgive, the woman I still loved despite everything. And now she was lying there, fighting for her life, and I was powerless to do anything. I sat by her side, hour after hour, the minutes ticking by in a slow, agonizing crawl. I thought about our life, our marriage, everything that had led us to this moment. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she'd hurt me, but all I could do was hold her hand, whispering words she couldn't hear. Days passed, and there was no change. The doctors were vague, offering little comfort, saying it could take time or that it might never happen. I felt trapped in limbo, caught between the hope of a future where she might wake up and the crushing reality that she might not. One evening, as I sat in the dim light of the hospital room, I heard a knock on the door. I looked up, expecting a nurse, but instead, a man walked in. Him, her lover. The man I had found in my house, in my life, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. He looked just as shocked to see me, his face pale, his eyes wide. "Frank," he started, his voice weak. "I didn't know." I stood up, my fists clenching, my heart pounding with a new surge of anger. "What the hell are you doing here?" I snarled. "Haven't you done enough?" He held up his hands, his expression pained. "I'm sorry, I just wanted to see if she was okay. I didn't mean to hurt you. I never meant for any of this." I felt a wave of fury rise in me, hot and fierce. "Get out," I growled, stepping closer. "Get the hell out before I do something I'll regret." He nodded quickly, backing away. "I'm sorry," he whispered, turning and walking out the door. I watched him go, my chest heaving, my hands shaking. I sat back down beside Joan, my emotions crashing over me like a tidal wave. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if Joan would wake up, if we would ever have the chance to rebuild, or if this was the universe's cruel way of ending things once and for all. All I knew was that I had a choice. I could walk away, leave her here, let the pain and anger consume me, or I could stay, hold on, and hope for a miracle. I squeezed her hand tightly, feeling the warmth of her skin against mine, and for the first time in a long time, I prayed. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that whatever happened, I needed to face it, to find a way to move forward, whether with Joan or without her. As the machines beeped steadily beside me, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Come back to me, Joan. Please, come back."